My MIL called me cheap, threw the ring I bought for her daughter at my face, so I ended the engagement. And what unfolded after left them speechless. I'm standing there, heart pounding, clutching the ring I bled my soul to buy, every cent scraped from years of sacrifice, my scars from serving this country. Her mother snatches it, sneers, "This cheap junk," and hurls it into my face like I'm nothing. The room freezes, her words a knife, "You're a nobody who can't provide." My love, my pride, my battles for Canada, crushed in one cruel moment. The pain cuts deeper than any wound I've ever known. I walked away, and what followed left them stunned. That moment, her mother's sneer, the ring hitting my face, it seared into my soul. But let me take you back to how this all started. I'm Ryan McDonald, 32 years old, born and raised in Truro, Nova Scotia, in a middle-class family where every dollar counted. My parents taught me to work hard, save smart, and never give up. That grit carried me through 5 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, serving in Afghanistan. I saw things there, friends lost, lives shattered, that made me value what really matters: love, loyalty, family. Now, I'm a construction worker in Dartmouth, building homes, trying to build a life. 2 years ago, at the Halifax International Busker Festival, I met Sophie. Picture this, the waterfront buzzing with jugglers, music, and the salty breeze off the Atlantic. I was there with my buddy, Mark, just grabbing a beer, not looking for anything special. Then I saw her, Sophie, 28, a schoolteacher with this warm, quiet glow. She was sketching the performers, her pencil dancing across the page. I walked over, asked, "What's that you're drawing?" She smiled, shy but bright, and said, "Just capturing the chaos." We talked for hours, from the festival to a late-night Tim Hortons run, sharing double-doubles and dreams. She wanted to teach kids art, not just math, but her mom, Evelyn, had other plans. Sophie warned me early on. "My mom's intense," she said one night, stirring her coffee, her voice low. "How intense?" I asked, half laughing. "She's got opinions on everything, my job, my clothes, my life," Sophie sighed. "She just wants me to be secure." I didn't think much of it then. Families can be complicated, right? But I'd soon learn Evelyn wasn't just opinionated, she was a force, like a nor'easter tearing through Halifax, determined to control Sophie's every move. And that storm was about to hit me head-on. That storm Sophie warned me about, her mother, Evelyn, it hit me like a freight train. After that night at the Halifax Busker Festival, I thought Sophie and I were building something real, something unbreakable. But Evelyn was lurking, ready to tear it all down. My first encounter with her was at their family home in Bedford, Nova Scotia, a tidy 2-story house on a quiet street, 10 kilometers from downtown Halifax. I pulled up in my beat-up pickup, still dusty from a construction site in Dartmouth, feeling like I was walking into a lion's den. Sophie squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, her smile nervous. "Just be yourself," she whispered. But I could feel the weight of Evelyn's judgment before I even crossed the threshold. Evelyn greeted us in the living room, her posture stiff, her smile as cold as a February wind off the Atlantic. She was in her late 50s, a retired bank manager with a sharp gaze that could cut through steel. George, Sophie's dad, a soft-spoken mechanic, gave me a nod, but Evelyn took charge. "So, Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with scrutiny, "you're the veteran Sophie's been talking about. What do you do now?" I squared my shoulders, trying to keep it light. "I work construction in Dartmouth, ma'am. Building homes, saving up for the future." She raised an eyebrow, her lips pursing. "Construction? That's unstable, isn't it? Sophie needs someone who can provide, you know, real security." The words hit like a slap, but I swallowed my pride. "I've got plans," I said, "maybe start my own contracting business one day." Evelyn smirked, glancing at Sophie. "Plans are nice, but results matter. Sophie's used to a certain standard." I felt my jaw tighten, the old scars from Afghanistan aching under my skin. I'd fought for this country, carried the weight of loss, and here was Evelyn, sizing me up like I was some kid who couldn't measure up. Sophie just sat there, eyes on her lap, twisting her hands. "Mom, he's doing fine," she mumbled, barely audible. Evelyn waved her off. "Sophie, darling, I'm just being practical. You're a teacher, but you could do better, maybe law, like I always said." That was the first time I saw it clearly. Evelyn wasn't just opinionated, she was a puppet master, pulling Sophie's strings. She didn't just have opinions, she had a chokehold on Sophie's life. Over the next few weeks, I saw more of Evelyn's control. Sophie wanted to paint, to create art that lit up her soul, but Evelyn shut it down every time. One evening, we were at a cafe in Halifax's North End, 2 kilometers from the waterfront, when Sophie showed me a sketch of Citadel Hill. "I'd love to sell these someday," she said, her voice soft but hopeful. I grinned, encouraging her. "You're amazing, Sophie. You could have a gallery show." But then her phone buzzed. "Evelyn, texting, why are you wasting time on doodles? Focus on your career." Sophie's smile faded, and she tucked the sketch away. "She's just looking out for me," she said, but her voice cracked, like she was trying to convince herself. I tried to be supportive, urging Sophie to stand up to Evelyn. "You don't have to let her control you," I told her one night, walking along the Dartmouth waterfront, the harbor lights flickering 500 meters away. "You're 28, Sophie. You can choose your own path." She nodded, tears in her eyes, but said, "It's not that simple, Ryan. She's my mom." I wanted to shake her, to make her see how Evelyn was suffocating her dreams, but I held back. I loved Sophie, her warmth, her quiet strength, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could help her break free. But deep down, a knot was forming in my gut. Evelyn wasn't just a problem for Sophie, she was becoming a problem for us. And that realization hit harder than any insult she'd thrown my way so far. Evelyn's shadow loomed over us like a storm cloud rolling in from the Atlantic, but I was determined to hold on to Sophie. After that tense first meeting in Bedford, I threw myself into our relationship, hoping love could outshine her mother's control. Sophie and I grew closer, carving out moments that felt like they belonged only to us. One crisp September evening, we drove 40 kilometers from Dartmouth to Peggy's Cove, the iconic lighthouse glowing against the twilight. We sat on the rocks, the waves crashing 10 meters below, and talked about our future. "I want a small house," Sophie said, her eyes sparkling like the ocean. "Somewhere I can paint, maybe teach kids art on the side." I squeezed her hand, my heart swelling. "We'll make it happen," I promised. "You and me, we'll build that life." For a moment, I believed we could escape Evelyn's grip. But Evelyn was relentless, her interference seeping into every corner of our world. A week later, we were at a diner in Halifax's South End, 3 kilometers from the waterfront, sharing a plate of poutine. Sophie's phone buzzed, another text from Evelyn. "She says I shouldn't wear this sweater," Sophie sighed, glancing at her green knit top. "She thinks it's too casual for a teacher." I clenched my fork, the cheese curds suddenly tasteless. "Why do you let her do this?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "It's just a sweater, Sophie." She looked away, her fingers twisting the napkin. "She's always been like this, Ryan. She just wants me to look professional." I wanted to scream. It wasn't about the sweater, it was about Evelyn dictating every choice Sophie made, from her clothes to her dreams. Evelyn's control didn't stop there. She started pushing Sophie to attend networking events in Halifax, fancy gatherings at places like the Prince George Hotel, 2 kilometers from our diner. "There's this lawyer, David, you should meet," Evelyn told her one Sunday over brunch at their Bedford home. I was there, sitting across from George, who was quietly sipping his coffee, avoiding the tension. "He's established, Sophie," Evelyn continued, ignoring me. "Someone who can give you stability." My blood boiled. I'd served in Afghanistan, rebuilt my life after the war, and here was Evelyn, acting like I was some drifter. "I'm right here, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady but edged with fire. "I love Sophie, and I'm working hard for our future." Evelyn barely looked at me. Love doesn't pay the bills, Ryan. Sophie deserves more than a construction worker's promises. Sophie's eyes dropped to her plate, her silence cutting deeper than Evelyn's words. The worst came a month later, at a community barbecue in Dartmouth's Shoeby Park, 5 kilometers from my apartment. Sophie and I were flipping burgers, laughing, when Evelyn showed up uninvited, her heels clicking on the gravel path. She pulled Sophie aside, her voice loud enough for me to hear. "You're wasting your time with him," she hissed. "He'll never afford a house in Halifax with that job. You need to think about your future." I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "Evelyn, this is our life, not yours," I snapped. She turned to me, her eyes cold as ice. "You're holding her back, Ryan. Sophie could do so much better." Sophie grabbed my arm, whispering, "Please, don't make a scene." But I could see it in her eyes. She was torn, trapped between her love for me and her fear of defying Evelyn. I tried to help Sophie break free. One night, under the stars at Point Pleasant Park, 4 kilometers from downtown Halifax, I held her close as she cried. "I want to paint, Ryan," she said, her voice breaking. "But Mom says it's a waste of time. She wants me to be someone I'm not." My heart ached, but anger surged too. "You're stronger than this, Sophie," I urged, my voice thick with emotion. "You don't need her permission to live your life." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her words haunted me. "I don't know how to fight her." I realized then that Evelyn wasn't just controlling Sophie, she was poisoning our relationship, planting doubts that grew like weeds. Every step we took together felt like a battle against her, and I was starting to wonder if love alone could win. The knot in my gut tightened, a warning that the worst was yet to come, and I was right. Evelyn was about to push me to my breaking point. Evelyn's constant meddling was like a noose tightening around our love, but I refused to let it choke me. After 2 years of fighting her shadow, I knew I wanted Sophie forever. I saved for months, every paycheck from my construction job in Dartmouth scraped together, until I could afford a ring, a gold band with a small, flawless diamond, simple but radiant, just like Sophie. I planned the proposal at Point Pleasant Park, 4 kilometers from Halifax's core, where the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. On a golden October afternoon, with the sun dipping low, I led Sophie to a quiet bench overlooking the harbor, 100 meters from the crashing waves. My hands shook as I pulled out the ring. "Sophie," I said, dropping to one knee, my voice thick, "you're my home, my future. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, her smile brighter than the Nova Scotia sunset. "Yes, Ryan, yes," she gasped, throwing her arms around me. I slipped the ring on her finger, and for that moment, Evelyn's storm felt 1,000 kilometers away. But that joy was short-lived. Sophie insisted we share the news with her family, and my gut churned at the thought of facing Evelyn. "They'll be happy for us," Sophie said, squeezing my hand as we drove the 10 kilometers to their Bedford home. I wasn't convinced, but her hope was infectious, so I nodded, gripping the steering wheel. We arrived at their 2-story house, the same one where Evelyn had first sized me up. George greeted us at the door, his handshake warm but reserved. Liam, Sophie's older brother, a quiet fisheries officer, gave me a nod from the couch. Evelyn sat at the dining table, her posture rigid, like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. Sophie held up her hand, the ring catching the light. "We're engaged," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. Evelyn's eyes locked onto the ring, her face twisting into a sneer. "That's it," she said, her voice slicing through the room like a blade. "That's the ring you chose?" Sophie's smile faltered. "It's beautiful, Mom," she said softly, but Evelyn stood, crossing the room in 3 sharp steps. She grabbed Sophie's hand, inspecting the diamond like it was a piece of glass from a thrift shop. "This is pathetic," she spat, her gaze burning into me. "You call this an engagement ring? It's barely a speck." My chest tightened, the air sucked out of the room. "I chose it for Sophie," I said, my voice steady but boiling inside. "It's meaningful, and it's what I could afford." Evelyn laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed off the walls. Afford? You're a construction worker, Ryan. Sophie deserves better than your scraps. Before I could respond, Evelyn yanked the ring off Sophie's finger and tossed it across the table. It skidded, landing inches from my plate, the clatter deafening in the silence. George shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "Evelyn, come on." Liam stared at his shoes, avoiding the scene. Sophie's face went pale, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. "Mom, please," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. Evelyn ignored her, turning to me. "If you can't even buy a proper ring, how will you provide for my daughter? You're cheap, Ryan, and you're dragging her down with you." My fists clenched, years of discipline from the forces keeping me from exploding. I'd faced gunfire in Afghanistan, but this was a different kind of war. "I love Sophie," I said, my voice low, shaking with rage. "This ring represents my commitment, not my bank account." Evelyn scoffed. "Commitment? Save your speeches. Sophie needs a man who can deliver." I looked at Sophie, waiting for her to defend me, to defend us. But she just sat there, eyes glued to the table, her hands twisting in her lap. That silence cut deeper than Evelyn's insults. I stood, my chair scraping the floor. "I'm not doing this," I said, grabbing the ring. "Sophie, let's go." She followed me to the car, her steps heavy, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said as we drove back to Dartmouth. She didn't mean it like that. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Didn't mean it?" I snapped, my voice raw. "She threw our future in my face, and you didn't say a word." Sophie's tears fell, but her silence was louder. That night, as I lay in my apartment, 5 kilometers from that toxic dinner, I felt the first crack in our love, a crack Evelyn had carved, and Sophie had let her. The sting of Evelyn's words, calling me cheap, hurling that ring across the table, felt like a bullet tearing through my chest, but Sophie's silence wounded me deeper. We left her family's Bedford home that night, the 10-kilometer drive back to Dartmouth heavy with unspoken pain. The ring, still in my pocket, burned like a coal against my thigh. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the Halifax skyline blurring past. "Sophie," I finally said, my voice raw, "why didn't you say anything? She humiliated me, and you just sat there." Sophie stared out the window, her face pale under the streetlights. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know what to say. "She's my mom." I slammed my hand on the dashboard, the sound echoing in the cab. "Your mom? She called our love trash, Sophie. And you let her." Her tears fell, but she didn't answer. That silence was a chasm, swallowing the future I'd dreamed of. Back at my apartment, 5 kilometers from Bedford's toxic dinner, I sat alone in the dark, the ring on the coffee table glinting like a broken promise. My mind spiraled, dragging me back to Afghanistan, nights in Kandahar, the screams of my squad, the weight of loss I'd carried home. I'd fought to rebuild my life, to find meaning in Sophie's warmth, but now it felt like I was losing everything again. I picked up the ring, its small diamond catching the moonlight, and my chest ached with a pain sharper than any shrapnel. I'd given Sophie my heart, my future, and she couldn't even stand up for me. Was I a fool for thinking love could conquer Evelyn's control? I called Sophie the next morning, hoping for a spark of fight in her. "We need to talk," I said, pacing my living room, the Dartmouth waterfront visible 500 meters away. "Ryan, I need time," she replied, her voice small, like she was speaking from a cage. "Mom's upset, and I don't want to make things worse." My jaw clenched. "Worse?" "Sophie," she threw our engagement in my face. "How is this about her?" She hesitated, then said, I can't fight her right now. I'm going to stay at their place for a bit." My heart sank, the phone heavy in my hand. "You're choosing her over us," I said, my voice breaking. "No, Ryan, it's not like that," she pleaded, but I could hear the surrender in her tone. It's exactly like that, I snapped, hanging up before the tears could fall. Days bled into a haze of anger and grief. Sophie's texts were sparse, each one a dagger. I'm sorry, I just need space. I stopped replying, the silence between us growing like a Nova Scotia fog rolling in from the Atlantic. One night, I sat at a bar in Halifax's North End, 3 kilometers from my apartment, nursing a Molson Canadian. Mark, my buddy from the Busker Festival days, slid into the booth across from me. You look like hell, man, he said, his voice blunt but kind. What's going on with Sophie? I told him everything, the ring, Evelyn's cruelty, Sophie's silence. Mark shook his head. Her mom's got her on a leash, Ryan. You can't fight that alone. His words hit hard, echoing the truth I'd been dodging. Sophie wasn't ready to break free, and I was breaking myself trying to save her. I drove to the Dartmouth waterfront that night, parking 200 meters from the ferry terminal, staring at the black water. Memories of Afghanistan flooded back, losing my squad, the guilt I'd carried for years. I'd survived that war, but this battle for Sophie's heart, was tearing me apart. I held the ring in my palm, its weight crushing. I'd fought for Canada, for my life, for love, but I couldn't fight Sophie's fear of her mother. The pain was unbearable, a void deeper than any I'd known. I realized then that love wasn't enough, not when Sophie couldn't choose me. And yet, a part of me still hoped she'd call, say she was ready to fight. But the phone stayed silent, and the darkness swallowed me whole. The darkness of that night by the Dartmouth waterfront, clutching Sophie's ring, felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Her silence, her choice to retreat to Evelyn's house, had shattered my hope. But a week later, Sophie's text lit up my phone. Can we talk? Mom wants us all to meet. My stomach twisted. Another ambush at Evelyn's Bedford home, 10 kilometers from my apartment, was the last thing I needed. Yet, a flicker of hope, maybe Sophie was ready to fight for us, pushed me to agree. Fine, I replied, my voice tight over the phone, but this is about us, not her. I drove through Halifax's quiet streets, the 4-degree chill of late October biting through my jacket, my heart pounding like it did before a mission in Afghanistan. I wasn't just facing Evelyn, I was fighting for my future. At the Bedford house, Sophie opened the door, her eyes red, her hands trembling. Thanks for coming, Ryan, she whispered, leading me to the living room. Evelyn sat on the couch, her posture as rigid as a Citadel Hill cannon, her face a mask of smug control. George hovered by the doorway, his eyes on the floor, while Liam, Sophie's brother, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his fisheries officer badge glinting on his jacket. The air was thick, like the calm before a nor'easter. Evelyn spoke first, her voice sharp as a blade. Ryan, we're here to fix this mess. If you're serious about Sophie, you'll apologize for storming out and get her a proper ring. My blood surged, the memory of her throwing my ring flashing like a grenade. Apologize? I said, my voice low, shaking with fury. You humiliated me, Evelyn. You called me cheap, tossed my love like garbage, and Sophie just watched. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You're not good enough for her, Ryan. A real man would have stepped up, not offered some dollar store trinket. My fists clenched, the scars from Kandahar burning under my skin. I'd faced death for this country, and now I was being gutted in a suburban living room. This isn't about your standards, I shot back, my voice rising. I love Sophie. I gave her everything I had. You don't get to decide what that's worth. Sophie's breath hitched, but she stayed silent, her hands twisting in her lap. Evelyn smirked. Love? That's a nice story, but Sophie needs security, not a construction worker's dreams. I turned to Sophie, my heart pounding, desperation clawing at me. Sophie, say something, I pleaded, my voice cracking. Do you believe in us, or is this just your mom's show? Her eyes met mine, wet with tears, but her lips trembled without words. Ryan, she started, then stopped, glancing at Evelyn. That hesitation was a knife, twisting deeper than any insult. Evelyn seized the moment. See? She knows I'm right. You're holding her back. I stood, my chair scraping the hardwood floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Enough, I said, my voice steady now, forged in the fire of my resolve. Sophie, I fought for you. I fought for us. But I can't fight your mother if you won't stand with me. I pulled the ring from my pocket, its gold band cold in my palm. This was my promise to you, I said, looking at Sophie, my voice thick with pain and pride. But I won't beg for a place in a life controlled by her. I set the ring on the table, the clink reverberating in the silent room. Evelyn's smirk faltered, her eyes widening. George cleared his throat, muttering, Ryan, maybe, but I cut him off. No, George. I'm done. I turned to Sophie one last time. You have to choose, me or her. But I'm not waiting for your mom to decide our future. Sophie sobbed, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Ryan, please, she whispered, but her voice was drowned by Evelyn's shadow. I walked out, the 10-kilometer drive back to Dartmouth a blur of rage and heartbreak. The Halifax skyline loomed, its lights mocking my shattered dreams. I'd survived war, but this defeat, this loss of Sophie to Evelyn's grip, felt like a wound I'd never outrun. The ring was gone, our love was broken, and I was alone. But as I pulled into my apartment parking lot, 200 meters from the waterfront, a strange clarity settled. I'd fought for what mattered. Now, I had to fight for myself. Walking out of Evelyn's Bedford home, leaving that ring behind, felt like abandoning a piece of my soul. The 10-kilometer drive back to Dartmouth was a blur, the Halifax skyline glowing like a distant dream I'd never reach. I'd fought for Sophie, for us, but her silence in that final confrontation, her inability to choose me over Evelyn, left a wound deeper than any I'd carried from Afghanistan. Yet, in that pain, something shifted. I'd stood up to Evelyn's control, and though my heart was shattered, I felt a spark of freedom, like the first breath after surfacing from a stormy Atlantic dive. I wasn't just walking away from Sophie, I was reclaiming myself. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from Sophie was deafening. Her texts stopped, and I stopped expecting them. I threw myself into work, hauling lumber at a construction site 3 kilometers from Dartmouth's waterfront, the ache in my muscles a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. But the nights were brutal, alone in my apartment, 200 meters from the ferry terminal, staring at the ceiling, haunted by Sophie's tear-streaked face. Mark, my buddy from the Busker Festival, noticed the change. One evening at a pub in Halifax's North End, 4 kilometers from my place, he slid a pint of Alexander Keith's across the table. You're carrying this like it's Kandahar all over again, he said, his voice steady. You survived that war, Ryan. You'll survive this. I nodded, but the weight of loss clung to me, heavy as a rucksack. Then, whispers of change reached me through mutual friends. Sophie had left Evelyn's house, moving into a tiny studio apartment in Dartmouth, 2 kilometers from the Halifax Seaport Farmers Market. She'd started selling her sketches there, her vibrant drawings of Nova Scotia lighthouses and fishing boats catching the eyes of locals and tourists alike. A friend, Sarah, who knew Sophie from her teaching days, called me one chilly November afternoon. She's different, Ryan, Sarah said, her voice low over the phone. Sophie told Evelyn she's done living for her approval. She's painting, working odd jobs, standing on her own. My heart twisted, pride for Sophie mixed with the sting of our broken bond. Good for her, I said, my voice rough. She deserves that. Evelyn, though, didn't take it well. Sarah told me Evelyn had tried to tighten her grip, threatening to cut Sophie off financially. If you want to throw your life away on art, don't expect my help, Evelyn had snapped, according to Sarah. But Sophie held firm, refusing to bend. For the first time, she was carving her own path, selling her art at the market, 1 kilometer from the waterfront, and teaching evening art classes at a community center in Halifax. Evelyn's control was slipping, and word spread among their Bedford neighbors that she'd been called out at a local book club for driving Sophie away. She's losing her hold, Sarah said. people see her for what she is now. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. Evelyn's empire of control was crumbling. For me, the pain didn't vanish, but it began to shift. I joined a veteran support group at a community hall in Halifax, 5 kilometers from my apartment, where I shared stories of Afghanistan and this new battle. The group became my anchor, their camaraderie reminding me I wasn't alone. One night, a fellow veteran, Tom, clapped me on the shoulder after a meeting. "You walked away from a toxic fight, man," he said, his voice gruff. "That's strength, not failure." His words sank in, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. I started volunteering at the hall, helping organize events for other veterans, finding purpose in community, a Nova Scotia value I'd almost forgotten. Sophie reached out once, a text late one night, "Ryan, I'm sorry. I'm trying to be me again." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. "I'm proud of you," I typed, then deleted it. She was finding her way, but I couldn't go back. The wound was too raw, the trust too broken. I'd fought for Canada, for Sophie, but now I was fighting for myself. As I stood on the Dartmouth waterfront, 200 meters from my apartment, watching the ferries glide across the harbor, I felt a quiet resolve. The storm Evelyn unleashed had nearly destroyed me, but I was still standing, stronger than before. Leaving Sophie's ring on that Bedford table, walking away from Evelyn's control, was the hardest fight I'd ever faced, harder than any mission in Afghanistan. The 10-kilometer drive back to Dartmouth that night felt like crossing a battlefield, my heart scarred but my resolve unbroken. I'd loved Sophie with everything I had, but I couldn't live under Evelyn's shadow, and Sophie's silence showed me she wasn't ready to break free. Yet, in the weeks that followed, I saw glimmers of change. Sophie was painting, selling her art at the Halifax Seaport Farmers Market, 2 kilometers from her new Dartmouth apartment. She was standing taller, defying Evelyn's grip, and though it hurt to know I wasn't part of her journey, I was proud. She was finding her voice, just as I was finding mine. Evelyn's empire of control crumbled, her neighbors whispering about her cruelty at community gatherings in Bedford, 10 kilometers from Halifax's core. She'd pushed Sophie away, and now she faced the consequences, alone, her demands echoing in an empty house. For me, the veterans group in Halifax, 5 kilometers from my apartment, became my lifeline. Sharing stories with men and women who'd faced their own wars, I found purpose, like a lighthouse cutting through Nova Scotia's fog. I volunteered, organized fundraisers for veterans' mental health, and felt the weight of my pain lighten. I'd lost Sophie, but I'd gained something deeper, a strength forged not just in war, but in choosing myself over a toxic fight. Here's what I learned, and I hope it stays with you. First, set boundaries, even with family. Love doesn't mean letting someone control your life. If they demand you shrink to fit their vision, walk away, you're worth more. Second, resilience isn't just surviving battles, it's standing up for your truth, like I did when I left that ring behind. Third, find your community. Whether it's a veterans hall in Halifax or a coffee shop in Truro, lean on those who lift you up. I'm Ryan McDonald, and I'm still standing, stronger than ever, because I chose my own path. This story tore me apart, but it rebuilt me. If it moved you, if you've ever fought to break free from someone's control, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below, let's share our battles and our victories. Hit that like button if you felt this, and subscribe to True North Courage for more stories of grit and heart. Together, we can find the strength to face any storm.